On behalf of the American Association of Equine Practitioners Racing Committee, here to discuss the AAEP's 10-point plan and offer an update on EIPH research, we have Dr. Kathleen Anderson, AAEP President and owner, Equine Veterinary Care, and once again, Dr. Nathaniel White from the Virginia Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine. Please welcome them.
Thank you, Donna, for rounding everybody up. We'll get started. And thank you to the Grace and Jockey Club Research Foundation for this opportunity to provide a progress report on the AAEP's 10-point plan, known as the Prescription for Racing Reform. There we go. Developed by the AAEP Racing Committee and released 1 year ago in July of 2015, this multi-part initiative was developed within our mission to protect the health and welfare of the horse, while working at the same time to help ensure the long-term viability of racing in the United States. We as veterinarians often work in more than one role in the racing industry. As doctors of veterinary medicine, the health of the horse must be our priority, but we are also industry stakeholders participating and volunteering in various aspects of the racing industry. Thus, the health of the horse is of great importance to the AAEP and our members. I'm here to briefly update you on the work done to date on the key items in the Prescription for Racing Reform. Number one, continue our support of the National Uniform Medication Program in all U.S. racing jurisdictions. The AAEP was an early supporter of national uniformity, and we want to see the continued adoption of this program in all racing jurisdictions. AAEP members have continued to advocate at ARCI and RMTC meetings this past winter and spring to help advance this effort. Number two, a ban on the use of anabolic steroids in training. I am pleased to say that regulations banning the use of these substances in training was approved by the Racing Medication and Testing Consortium in 2016 and is included in the out-of-competition testing recommendation to RCI for their July meeting. A 6-month veterinary list for anabolic use is included in this recommendation. Number three, restrict the administration of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs to 48 hours before racing. A 48-hour rule removes any question that the use of anti-inflammatories could compromise a pre-race inspection. We know this is a controversial topic within the industry, but it is not without precedent. Canada has had a 48-hour NSAID rule for several years, and New York has been operating under this rule since 2015. This recommendation has not been adopted by any additional regulatory groups, but the AAEP believes that the rule merits further evaluation by all agencies to ensure that we are doing everything we can to protect the health and welfare of our racehorses. This is a philosophical debate that AAEP is engaged in. Number four, support uniform regulations for compounded medication. The variability of state and federal rules on compounding has made uniformity very challenging to achieve. This is an important issue, as we saw from our just previous presentation, for racehorse health and safety. And so the AAEP will continue to look for new avenues to achieve uniform regulation. Number five, support the implementation of effective security measures to enforce medication rules. This is a very important issue for veterinarians and one which the AAEP has had a long history of supporting. While the AAEP is an advocate for better security at racetracks, the reality is that we are unable to implement changes. So we will continue to share our conviction with regulators and track management that improved security is critical to the long-term viability of the sport. We believe no one in this sport wants to place ethical veterinarians and ethical trainers at a disadvantage because of ineffective security. Number six, support tougher sanctions for those who violate the rules of racing. The AAEP endorses penalties for any licensee, including, when warranted, owners, veterinarians, and the suspension of individual horses from racing. We will continue to support measures to achieve this through regulatory agencies. Number 7, the AAEP supports the implementation of a national uniform program for out-of-competition testing. This element goes hand in hand with the goal of the previous points to deter the administration of illicit substances. Out-of-competition testing is successfully progressing in numerous racing jurisdictions. For example, last month at Fair Hill, where I practice, 22 horses underwent out-of-competition testing before the Preakness weekend. A national uniform procedure for out-of-competition testing has been approved by the RMTC board and has been submitted to RCI for a vote at their July meeting. Number 8, create national uniform procedures for veterinarians list reciprocity. The veterinarians list identifies horses deemed unfit and ineligible to race for medical reasons. A horse determined to be unsound to race in Kentucky, for example, should also be considered unsound to race in Maryland. The ARCI's group of racing regulatory veterinarians, which is led by Dr. Lynn Hovda, has been working since last year's Welfare and Safety Summit to create a uniform procedure, and they are close to completing the model rule for industry consideration. Stay tuned for their work, and we hope that this will be in place by year end. The final 2 points of the prescription for racing reform are focused on exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage, or EIPH, and the AAEP's intent to investigate alternative management strategies. Former AAEP president and renowned researcher Dr. Nat White has led our work in this area, and it is my pleasure to now invite Dr. White to discuss our specific efforts in the last 7 months. Please welcome Dr. White.
Thank you, Kathy. About a year ago, Dr. Jeff Blea called me and said, AAP needs to do something about EIPH. We have a dilemma in the veterinary profession, in the racing profession, and that is, as veterinarians, we know that Lasix helps to reduce EIPH, and we feel that's of benefit to the health of the horse. Whereas in the public arena, in the racing arena, there's pressure to have no medications on race day. So by eliminating that, if that were to happen, we think we're putting the horse in jeopardy. And as I'll show you a little bit later, some of the damage that can come from EIPH. For full transparency, I have not done research on EIPH. I have not worked on the racetrack. But I was, in a personal note, I used to have pulmonary hemorrhage when I ran track and cross country. It does occur in humans. You don't see it, but it happens, and it's apparently a similar event. So the goal was to get researchers together to see what they said about research that's been done and what they would propose to be the next step that might lead us to having something we can do that would slow down at least or manage EIPH, maybe even prevent it without having medications on race day. And 9 researchers. We had people that had done research in horses. We had researchers from human medicine that came together. We talked about epidemiology, vascular physiology. We talked about the venous remodeling that we know occurs, cardiology and how that might affect EIPH, blood flow in the lung, the efficacy of furosemide or Salix, and the potential for regenerative medicine. The goals were we wanted to have a proposal and prioritize research that would help us understand EIPH and that which may in fact help advance the prevention and management of it. And we would have a report and share that with members and the public. So we started out with what's our current knowledge? And this is the consensus of these panelists. This was the summary. All horses undergoing acute intensive exercise experience EIPH. Maybe there's some that don't get that, but we really feel, and they felt that it is happening, is throughout the racing horse world. Some obviously get it more than others. 50 to 60% racehorses have EIPH that is based on endoscopy after exercise. And horses with a grade 2 or greater of EIPH, when they experience that, have less or a decreased performance. It's also been shown that Salix decreases the severity of EIPH. Again, that's the basis for our feeling about its use to help protect the horse. And as of now, it's estimated 95% of horses in the United States get Salix before racing. So what's the issue? How does this work? And so we went through the discussion about what happens when horses bleed. Again, it was the consensus that EIPH is the result of a physiologic response involving the heart and the lung. Dr. Holcomb nicely shows some of the evidence about how much the lung has to perform during racing. The heart pumps about 500 liters per minute, 132 gallons. That's an amazing piece of data. Even more so to me is the airflow of 60 to 70 liters per second that the horse has to exchange to do their job. And so it's now considered a heart overload. Heart's pumping as fast as it can. The circulation is bringing that blood around through the lung. At least in the horses that are having trouble, that heart starts to not be quite as efficient at that, and the blood starts to back up into the lung, into the vessels that come out of the lung into the heart. So you get an increased pressure. And they've shown this with some what we call wedge pressure data. So this increased pressure, and this is a picture I pointed out. This is normal lung. This is a microscopic picture of the lung. The pink and little blue that you see, that's the wall of that alveolus, the air sac. And in that are small capillaries where the blood flows, so it's in close contact with the air, and you can get that exchange of oxygen. This is a picture of a capillary. This is from David Poole at Kansas State, who's done some research. And so this capillary is very distended. Usually you'd only see one red blood cell in there at a time. And this one over here, because of the increased pressure within the capillary and the negative pressure from the horse trying to breathe so fast, this capillary ruptures. And that's literally what happens and causes EIPH. So now you have blood in the lung. And over time, there are several things that happen. There's a concern that there's inflammation in the lung, although there's not much proof of this because we don't have very many tissues or evidence of that, as I'll talk about. But this is a lung from a horse that has had chronic EIPH. And you can see the gray cast color. That's the damage that's been done. The pink that you see on the other side, that would be normal lung when we would look at it. So we see lung fibrosis, pulmonary vessel scarring. So this piece of lung, which is normal, turns to this. And so this is the effect, long-term chronic EIPH. There is permanent damage. And it's easy to understand how this horse might have decreased performance over time. At the same time, AAEP was looking at trying to understand this process and making recommendations. Grayson went forward with some projects, to fund some projects, looking at what would happen if Lasix were given, Salix were given at 24 hours before the exercise compared to the normal 4 hours. So 2 projects were funded. There was a call for research. They were evaluated, and 2 projects were funded, one at Washington State University and then the other at UC Davis. Both of them were looking at this question about what would happen if you gave the Salix 24 hours before the racing time. These horses that they accumulated had a history of EIPH, so that there was a known product. They were evaluated on the treadmill and on the racetrack. Or I should say they are being evaluated because the work isn't done yet. We were hoping for a little bit more information at this report, but right now, there's still work being done. So this was based on some preliminary work that was done that suggested that this 24-hour Lasix would in fact help reduce bleeding. The research has been supported by numerous organizations. I think this is very important. If this work is going to get done, we're going to have resources to do it. I think these organizations need to be complimented for stepping up and trying to help with this project, or these projects. So as of now, the WSU study, their study was 5 treatments, a control or no treatment, 2 different doses of Salix before exercise, and then restricted water with and without Salix. They did, in the initial phase of this, they did look at it and found that restricting water did not have an effect on EIPH severity. The rest of it, there's not a statistical analysis yet, so it's premature to say anything about it. The researchers keeping it close to the vest appropriately because they don't want to have their information out that would taint the original or the final report. So this project from WSU has 2 phases. 2 selected treatments from that phase 1 will be tested in match races on the WSU racetrack. And then the 3rd phase, where the treatment with the most potential would be tested in simulated races at Emerald Downs. The work at UC Davis is a direct comparison between the normal timing of Salix administration and that at 24 hours prior to the exercise. Right now, they're still in phase 1, still getting some horses tested on the treadmill, and apparently when they're ready, go to have all tested in simulated races. Fortunately, again, we don't have more information on that, but I think I have to compliment Grayson for moving ahead to see if we can find some solutions to this problem. The researchers had their ideas of what they proposed would be the next step. I challenged them. I said, what would you do next? And then eventually prioritize that, and then tell me how much it might cost. And so they went through, and these are some of the results of that, which is in fact a summary of some of the projects that they talked about. One was to evaluate the release of cytokines during exercise with and without Salix. The question is, does furosemide, does Salix have some other effect other than having reduction of blood volume by urination? And so there's a feeling that there are things that happen in the horse, and the cytokine is one way we could look at the potential for what happens in the inflammatory response that we think happens in the lung. So that was suggested as one way to approach this. Decreasing the blood volume to try and really show that it's the heart overload and the pulmonary congestion that's the problem. Could we decrease the blood volume and show that then there's no EIPH? Test the effectiveness of nasal strips on mitigating EIPH. There is research, well done at Kansas State, showing an effect of nasal strips. I know that that's been suggested it really doesn't work, but I think the way it's applied and so on needs to be retested and find out if in fact it's in that. Because if it did, that would be one way that you could right away start helping the horse. Examine the difference in blood vessel response to exercise in raced and unraced horses. There's a question, is if they are racing, is that response elevated or increased? Is there something about the racehorse that makes them more prone compared to a horse that's not at that level? Again, this is trying to understand what happens. It won't necessarily give us a rate to mitigate this, but it might tell us what to do for the next step, because if we could learn about that, maybe there is a treatment we could use. Determine the amount of EIPH during training. Trainers know that this happens. We would like to know when it starts. We'd not know how fast they go. It's an opportune time that we could learn how this whole process starts, and it was felt that this would be important to the horse's health. Develop biomarkers. We heard about biomarkers today, but this would be for the lung. Is there a way that we could take a test, blood sample, or some other test and say, this horse is having a problem now and it's going to be having more trouble with EIPH So again, another marker that might help. Interesting to me was this last one, which is assess stem cell potent potential to decrease inflammation and repair damage in the lung. The little picture that you see here is actually from the mouse. It's from the Harvard Med School. And they are taking stem cells and revascularizing lung. They're actually taking damaged lung and having the stem cell go in and reproduce a more normal stance. So that's probably far-fetched for the horse, but there's doing so many things with regenerative medicine now, it probably is an area that should be looked at. So what are the next steps? AAEP is standing up saying we need to do something about this. We want to continue collaboration with the Grayson Jockey Club Foundation in promoting this research and helping to find funding for it. We know that as stakeholders, we need to step up and talk to the industry about the importance of this and tell people the need for research and the need to solve this problem. The researchers said we want to develop a consortium, and this was similar to what was done for the equine genome. Groups of researchers around the world got together and said, we'll do this piece, you do the other piece, and when we get done, we'll put it together. And that was very successful. It speeded up making the genome completed, and we think, and the researchers think, that they could be more efficient if they got together and decided what resources could best do what part of the research. Whoops, too fast. Seek additional finances and resources. This would be on top of what resources are available now. We think we don't want to compromise what is needed for many other areas, but we're going to have to raise resources. The projects are expensive. The work that they're doing right now, you have to get horses, you have to maintain horses. There's lots of costs, and so research is expensive, and we're going to have to meet that challenge. We're also very pleased with the way Grayson Jockey Club Foundation does the assessment of the research. We think that that's the way it should be done. We don't want to cheapen this. We have to do it right so that when we get results, we can believe it. And so we believe in the scientific rigor needs to be upheld. So that was the report from the research panel, and I'll turn it over to Kathy to finalize.
Thank you. In closing, we'd like to switch disciplines from racing to carriage driving because the team is most successful when all of the horses in the hitch are working in unison, moving in the same direction, and I think that's very true of the stakeholders in this room today. As veterinarians, our primary responsibility is to the horse. Those of you here today share our commitment to welfare and safety. We welcome opportunities to work in unison with all of the elements here today of our 10-point plan and any other initiatives that will benefit the horse. Thank you again for your attention, and thank you to Grayson for the invitation to be here today. No questions? Okay.